All right, hi class. Well, this will be our last lecture, and like I said in my announcement that I posted the other day. I put this together having read all your work this week and thinking about what you need for this paper. So there is no quiz on any of this material, but I really hope you'll watch this because I think it will be useful to you in um, in putting together your essay. And I know that you've begun at least the outline, and you may have begun the draft as well. So my hope is that this advice that I'm giving here is not about starting over, but rather about kind of working with what you've got and honing it and making it as good as it can be. So let me just get into it. All right. So what I'm going to talk about is just analyzing the question, which we've kind of already done, but I just want to sort of reinforce that. Talking about narrowing your topic, which was something that came up in the discussion, in the topic worksheet discussion this week. I think that seems like something that is going to be important. I've had a couple questions about what I mean when I ask you to look for dialogue, opportunities for dialogue. So I'll talk about that, writing the thesis for this paper, introductions, structure, and conclusions. So a lot of stuff to cover. So the question, as I think you all know by now, is how is the issue you've chosen to study, whatever that is, perceived by commentators on both the right and the left in America? Is dialogue possible between these two points of view? And if we break that down, there's three parts. How is the issue you've chosen to study perceived by commentators on both the right? That's sort of part one. How do people on the right see this? And how do people on the left see this? And number three, is dialogue possible between these two points of view? And if you look at these three parts, your research is in particular, most likely, going to be about the first two areas. Who's talking about this on the right side and who's talking about this on the left side? Which conservatives are talking about this and which liberals are talking about it? And your research is going to support a lot of it's going to be about that. Number three, is dialogue possible between these two points of view? That really is up to you. That's where your idea really comes in. And so don't forget this part of the essay. This is really important. This is where you're going to get to speak. And it's about using the first two parts of the paper, looking closely at the right and the left, and trying to think up your own kind of solution to cross the empathy wall. Because for any of these topics, as we've seen in the discussions this week and in the outlines you guys are writing, um, it's very, very divided. And the question is there a way for these two different sides to speak to one another? And I know that's hard. And the answer might be no, I don't think there is. But I want you to be thinking about that question deeply and leaving room in your essay to really kind of flesh that part out. So I hope today will help you. This little lecture will help you with that. So here are the possible topics. And if you look at them, they're all, to varying degrees, rather broad topics. And I just wanted to say that focus is important with this paper. I mean, it always is, but these are rather big topics, huge topics about which lots of people have written lots of things. And so you won't. I hope you've found that there's no shortage of material on any of these topics. Um, so you can just talk about religion or affirmative action affirmative action's narrower than religion. Religion is one of those really big ones. Gender or sexuality, another really big one. Um, Race, that huge. Some of these are bigger than others. Things that are more policy issues, welfare, taxation, these are a little narrower, but some of them you might want to narrow in on a specific part of the topic. So think about that. Just encourage you to think about that. Remember, I've said this to a lot of you, say more about less. Um, and that means you'll be able to speak more in depth if you narrow in, rather than having something really, really broad and trying to cover many, many topics. Even though 2,000 words may seem like a lot to you, and I know it is a lot, um, the, the focus might actually help you write more, ironically. It, just think about narrowing your topic if it would help. So let's imagine that I'm going to write about the environment, and this is not one of the topics you can write about. So we're imagining that I'm writing this paper, but about a different topic, the environment, which is the reason I didn't allow you to write about that is because that's so much, that's such the central part of the book that I wanted you to kind of look a little more deeply for those other side topics. Okay, but let's imagine I'm writing this paper about the environment. So there's many, many things that I can think of as subtopics about this. The EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency, and environmental regulations. Liberals and conservatives have very different views about that. Pollution, industrial pollution, and how to deal with that, I guess. Climate change, that's a huge area. Uh, and the energy sector, we have coal, fracking, there's offshore drilling, and then there's other more sustainable sources of energy like wind energy and solar energy. Um, any one of these things could be a more narrow topic, and there's plenty, 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 plenty of material on any one of those. And there are many other environmental issues I could look at as well. So that would sort of help me. I think if I were writing this about the environment, it would help me to narrow in a little bit. And it would be a little more interesting rather than saying conservatives don't care about the environment, liberals do. That's maybe a very simple way to think about this. And if I get more precise, I can think in a little more, with a little more complexity. So let's say that for my paper that I'm uh, going to be kind of walking you through today, I'm going to focus on the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, which is notoriously detested by conservatives. So much so that in the current administration, the administrator for the EPA was a man. He's recently he's lost his job for complicated reasons, but Scott Pruitt was the administrator for the EPA, and he has a long history of he's written many things about how much he hates the EPA, and so it's an interesting time to think about the Environmental Protection Agency, I think. Okay, so the question on the prompt that sort of leads up to is dialogue possible between these 2 points of view. Let me clarify what I mean by that. Is there common ground? Sometimes it can seem, if you look at, say, Fox News on one side and MSNBC on another, and you look at their coverage of different topics, or even what topics they talk about, it can seem like they're having totally different conversations. Like they're so far apart, not just in what they think, but what they're even talking about. And I think that's the case with my topic here as well. So, what I'm asking you to think about is would there be a way that someone who's really on the conservative side could speak to someone that's really on the liberal side, and vice versa? is common ground possible? How can we as a society move forward if dialogue is not possible? What do we do? You know, yeah. Our and then another way that might be helpful to think about is as you look at the sort of two extremes, are there elements of each side that you find useful that we could sort of pick a little bit from over here and a little bit from over here, and then we could find some kind of synthesis that um, that would help us all agree and sort of move forward that way? Or do you think that one side is just plain wrong and they need to we they need to learn that? Um, all of those are different possibilities, but your idea, this is your analysis, and I want to know what you think we can do to move forward on this topic as a society, as an American society. Okay. So one way you might think about this and you might approach this is by making a Venn diagram, which is what I'm going to do here. So we have the left on one side and the right on one side, and I'm going to kind of, simplifying. I'm going to think about what the left think about the EPA and what the right think about the EPA. So the right don't support the Environmental Protection Agency typically, the left do typically. The right think it's a job killer, that the regulations take away jobs, and the left think that regulation will keep industry in check to keep it from damaging the environment further. So, but the right thinks basically that the EPA is basically in conflict with industry, therefore not good. The left, on the other hand, thinks the EPA should be there because it's important for health. The right thinks it's a waste of tax dollars. The left thinks that it's essential to look after the environment, and who else is going to do that? It's not industry. We can't rely on them to do it. So we need the EPA to do so. And the right thinks that we shouldn't value birds over people. And I talked about this in the book, of course. That was an example. Birds, water, owls, mice, whatever, right? That people and their jobs are more important. Um, and the left, this is something that I'm going to be interested in my paper, I think. The left thinks that we can use funds to support new clean technology, which could be a solution to a jobs issue. And so that's where looking, trying to find middle ground or opportunities for dialogue. There's something I see as an opening, maybe. Well, first of all, one possible middle ground is that everyone cares about their health. We read a lot about this in the book. It's a little complicated, but no one wants to get sick. Um, the people in the book don't like being sick. They don't want the pollution to make them sick. Um, it's a disagreement about how to go about that, but maybe there's opportunity there. Um, Another thing, and this is the sort of opening that I think I'm going to focus on, is that clean energy is a sector of the economy that's growing, and so clean energy is wind power, solar power, and things like that. That the EPA historically in the Obama administration supported, not so much right now, but that there's an opportunity there because that's an economic issue, and because I think economic issues are important for conservatives. Um, I think this is a possible way forward. So this is one way you go about it, looking for the common ground. Draw a little Venn diagram. Okay. So I hope that helps there. Now I'm going to move on to the next thing, which is writing the thesis for this paper. There are so many parts here, and the really important piece is number 3, because number 1 and 2 are kind of factual. It's really about number 3. That's the main attraction of your essay. So that's what we want to lead up to. And I'll give you my example. I make my thesis 2 sentences. The first sentence is about the answer to questions 1 and 2, and the last sentence is question 3. And I think, like I said, I think that's really the core issue and the core of the thesis. So I say, while the left values the EPA because they believe it is essential for the health of people and the planet, the right sees the EPA as a job killer and a threat to industry. So far so good, but it's not terribly arguable, like I said. So that's not the main part of my thesis. So it's kind of like level 1. Level 1 and 2 of the thesis. And then this last part is level 3, which is where we're going to go with that. What's the significance of that difference? And the significance, I'm saying, is though there is little common ground between these positions, conservatives may someday support the EPA if and when it becomes a job creator. So that's my idea. That's going to be my idea for dialogue. That here's how I think it could work in the future. Here's how I think dialogue could happen. Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about is then introductions and conclusions, which I haven't done a lecture on yet. And it's not by accident that I'm leaving this until the very end, because I wanted you to focus more on the content, your organization of your paragraphs, your use of evidence, and your structure of your essay and all of this stuff. But it is important to know how to write an introduction and a conclusion. And so I'll give you a few pointers. So the key thing about an introduction is it should give the reader what they need to understand your thesis. So my thesis is a little complicated. It's got a lot of parts to it. There's a lot of information here, and if you just didn't know what the EPA was, you didn't know left and liberal and conservative views on that, you didn't know what clean energy was, I mean, you'd be lost here, right? So the purpose of the introduction is to help your reader not be lost. So what does the reader need to understand your thesis? That's the question you should be asking yourself. And anything that they need to understand it should be in your introduction. Any words that are hard to understand, are specialized words, should be defined in your introduction. Any concepts should be in your introduction. So here are the things that my reader needs. What is the EPA? What does it do? What do liberals think of it? What do conservatives think of it? And how are these views at odds, or why is it so hard for them to be compatible? Also, you want to sort of communicate in your introduction what the purpose of this paper is. You may state that kind of directly, or it may be more implied. I'm going to show you, I've written an introduction for this paper. And let me walk you through it, okay? So first off, we've got here a hook. So for my hook, I decided to find 2 really representative quotes of a more liberal view of the EPA and a more conservative view. On the liberal side, I found a speech by Barack Obama, and on the conservative side, I found something that Scott Pruitt, who, as I said, was the administrator of the EPA, who didn't like the EPA, as confusing as that is, way he described it. So I say, in a speech, former Democratic President Barack Obama once said that the Environmental Protection Agency was essential in making sure that we've got clean air, clean water, a great future for our kids. Scott Pruitt, the recently ousted EPA administrator, a conservative, once called the EPA a wayward federal agency, arbitrarily using unsubstantiated, inaccurate, and flawed data. So you can see there's very different points of view. Let me just point out one thing too. I've got 2 quotes here, and you see I don't have citations, but that's only because I say the name of each of the authors. But because they're quotes, of course, I have these in my works cited. And I have, here's the Obama quote, here's the Pruitt quote. And those are sources that I'm using, so I need to have them in my works cited page. All right, so that's my hook. Then here's the element where I talk about what the EPA is, and I just say it really briefly. The mission of the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. So I spell it out first, and then I can use the initials. Is to quote protect human health and the environment by administering environmental regulations, financing special projects, and conducting research. And this I cite because I don't say the author, and that too is right here, our mission, what we do. Okay, so that's defining what the EPA is, and then I'm talking about the liberal and conservative points of view. Okay, so while on the surface this might not seem, let's see, let me highlight this whole section. Okay, while on the surface this might not seem controversial, when it comes to the EPA, liberals and conservatives are completely at odds. On one hand, liberals highlight the fragile nature of our ecosystems and think the EPA is essential for looking after the health of people on the planet. On the other hand, conservatives worry about having a job and see the EPA as another attempt on behalf of a bloated government to take those jobs away. So those are the two different points of view. Now here's the part where I say why it's so hard for them to agree. These points of view seem utterly incompatible. Do you care about the environment, or do you care about jobs? And then I'm leading up to my thesis here. While the polarized dialogue between liberals and conservatives makes it seem as if we have to pick one, perhaps it's possible to care about both. And then here's the thesis I wrote. While the left buys the EPA because they believe it is essential for the health of people on the planet, the right sees the EPA as a job killer and a threat to industry. Though there is little common ground between these positions, conservatives may someday support the EPA if and when it becomes a job creator. So that thesis makes more sense now, right? Now that we've led up to it and explained all of the pieces of it. Okay, so that's the introduction, and I'll post this up so you can look at it a little more closely. I hope that helps a little bit. Let's go back here. So now you've got your introduction, your thesis. So now let's think about the body paragraphs. And as I said before about structure, there's not one right answer. It just has to make sense to you. So I'm going to show you one way that makes sense to me with my topic, but it's really important that you know this is not the only way to do this paper. Really, there's many different ways you could do this. But the one really logical way, there's three parts of this question. What's a liberal view, what's a conservative view, and how do you have dialogue? 1, 2, 3. That could be a kind of really rough outline right there. And I think it is for some of you with your outlines. But keep in mind that 5-paragraph essay is not going to work for 2,000 words. You're probably going to need multiple paragraphs on each topic. So here are going to be my paragraphs. First, a paragraph of background. What is the EPA? What does it do? And I show some research about the role of the EPA. That's a really important thing for someone to understand at the start of my paper. And then a paragraph or two on liberal views and values related to the EPA and the environment. And then a paragraph, and so that will be about, the idea that we need to take care of our planet and why that's important. Conservative views and values, and I'm talking a lot about jobs and industry, so I'll sort of focus on why that is, for conservatives, is more important. And then I want a paragraph that will sort of explain a little better why it's so hard to find compromise. And I think the issue for me is that the EPA became to be seen as a job killer. Why is that? And I think it has to do with the history of certain kinds of industry polluting, and the EPA coming in and saying, no, you can't do that, and how that was sort of perceived as shutting down jobs for for people. And of course, Hawkschild in her book talks a lot about this, so that would be an area I could use her. And then I want to bring in this idea of clean energy, and talk a little bit about that industry, with show some research about how that's growing as a sector and how jobs are being created, and then come in with my proposal, which is that the EPA can, you know, once again, finance clean energy projects, especially, and this is my idea, in areas that were previously dominated by coal and fossil fuel extraction, which are probably, as Hochschild showed in her book, more conservative areas. And if maybe in those areas there are new jobs coming in that are supported by the EPA, maybe that could change people's point of view about the EPA and environmental regulations. That's my idea. And then we'll lead to a conclusion. So speaking of the conclusion, there are kind of three pieces of any conclusion, and beyond this, it can look like many. It can look many different ways. But you want to, at the minimum, summarize the thesis for us again, summarize the main points that you walked us through in the essay, and then this is the really new and important part. So what? Tell us why this matters. Why we should care about this. I do want to add that you shouldn't have new. The so what is kind of a new element to the paper, but you shouldn't bring in new evidence that should have been in your body paragraphs. The so what is sort of taking the whole, really zooming out from the whole idea and thinking about why it matters, but it's not bringing in some new reason you haven't said before. That can be a tricky distinction to understand. I don't really know how to explain it better right now, but I hope that helps, and I'll give you an example of my conclusion in a minute. With this paper, your focus, as I mentioned in the prompt, is not really on your own point of view, it's on these sort of broad categories of points of view. Liberal, conservative, and how to have dialogue, and you're being kind of neutral, like Hochschild is in her book. She doesn't talk a lot about her points of view. She's trying to just look outside of herself and study and understand. So your essay is kind of like that. But in your conclusion, if you want to bring in your point of view, this would be an appropriate time to do that. It's not required, but it's a possible way to do that. So let me show you what I did with my conclusion. Okay, so here's this right here is a kind of restatement of my thesis, but with new words, okay? You don't want to just state the same thing over with the same words, but in a kind of new way. And I say, by and large, clean energy is not yet valued by conservatives, but perhaps if the EPA begins creating many clean energy jobs, this will change conservative views of the agency and environmental regulation in general. That's kind of restating my idea about the EPA becoming a job creator and how that could change people's point of view. All right, now here's the rest of this paragraph is me walking through the points that I would have made in this paper. As I have shown, and you're welcome to say something like that. Some people don't like that, but you can say, as I have shown, or refer to yourself. Here's what I did. Here's what I said. You can use phrases like that if you want. As I have shown, liberals value protection of the environment because they don't trust industry to self-regulate. That would have come up earlier in the paper. Conservatives, on the other hand, value jobs above the environment. I have proposed that clean energy, a historically liberal cause championed by environmentalists, might become a conservative cause too, if and when the EPA helps create jobs in areas formerly dominated by environmentally damaging energy production like coal, mining, fracking, and oil drilling. So that's a summary. Nothing new there. I've already said that in my paper. Now I'm actually including a second paragraph. With your introduction or your conclusion, there's nothing that says it has to be just one paragraph. You probably don't want more than 2, 3 at the absolute maximum, but here I think it seems it'll be helpful to have a paragraph break here. So I'm going to put it into a third or a second paragraph. And this is the so what. Here's why I think this matters. And in my case, I'm going to bring it up to date with what's happening with the EPA right now. Um, and that's a kind of new element that helps me talk about why it's important. In the Trump administration, environmental issues have taken a backseat in favor of job creation. For example, in March, the Trump administration opened nearly all U.S. coastline to offshore drilling after decades of action by the EPA to limit such drilling. And I've got a source for that too. Okay, that will go on my works cited as well. Thus, it seems my proposed solution is not on the table right now. However, as we move forward, it is vital for the health of our planet that we move toward clean energy. And if the EPA does not lead the charge, then who will? So here's me. This is sharing my point of view, right? This is what I think about this. For the sake of our planet, our kids, and yes, the economy, that's the common ground that I think there is. It is vital that all of us, liberals and conservatives, throw our support behind clean energy. So you see, that's kind of a new element. I'm zooming out. I'm saying why all of this is important. All right. So that's basically it. There is just one last thing I want to say about this essay, which is to remember that the left, even though we're kind of breaking it down and simplifying things, and you're summing up what liberals think, here's what liberals think, and here's what conservatives think, there are so many shades of gray. This is not black and white. Even in our current climate where things are very polarized, people have many different points of view. There's no one left or liberal point of view and no one right or conservative point of view. So they're not monolithic. And what that means is that there are different points of view on each side. And so I just want to say that I'm not asking you to simplify it. Feel free to acknowledge different shades of liberal and conservative. Complexity is good. Um, and your job when you integrate something that is a little complex is to explain it and break it down for us. Show how it still sort of supports your thesis that liberals think this and conservatives think that. Okay. All right. I hope this has been helpful to you. I know this is a longer video. Thank you for watching. I'm really looking forward to reading all your papers, and we'll see you all online. All right.